Dave Vormelker. I have been familiar with the photograph accompanying this monograph for more than 60 years. It is a professional portrait. A Paul Ludlow studio photograph of a fellow I've admired since I was 10 or 12 years old. That's because here was a guy who was, to my way of thinking, a bona fide newspaper reporter. His name was Clifford David, Dave, Vormelker. When Vermilion's pro-photog Ludlow took this photo, Dave was a reporter, photographer for the Cleveland Plain Dealer. To a small-town kid like myself, being a reporter for a paper like the Plain Dealer was big time. Some kids looked up to baseball players. I looked up to big city reporters. For me, anyone who had a byline with a story published in a daily was a major league journalist. Vormelker had a lot of bylines. Born July 26, 1906, he was the son, and the youngest of 4 children born to German-born parents Julius, born in 1861, and Amy Vormelker, born in 1867, whose families had immigrated to America in 1866 and 1889 respectively. He grew up among numerous other families of German descent in what was then a tidy blue-collar neighborhood on the east side of Cleveland. His father worked as a milling machine operator in a factory. As the years passed, it was apparent that the family had a strong work ethic and viewed education, not as a right, but a privilege. By 1930, Rose, the eldest child and only daughter, had graduated college and had gone to work at the Cleveland Public Library. She would later distinguish herself by creating and managing the Business Information Center of the Cleveland Public Library from 1928 to 1955. During World War II, she worked for the U.S. Information Service, establishing over 4,000 defense and war information centers. In 1956, she became the librarian for the Cleveland Plain Dealer and Cleveland News, a position she held until 1962. After she retired, she taught library science at Kent State University, creating the first newspaper library course along with workshops for news librarians, and remained there as an adjunct professor of library science until her death in 1994 at the age of 99. His brother Howard had become a metallurgy engineer at General Electric. His brother Philip had taken a job as chemist for a rubber manufacturing company. In the meantime, Dave was a student at Cleveland's Western Reserve University. He graduated with a B.S. degree in library science in 1933. By 1940, Dave was married to a city social worker named Helen and had gone to work as both a college and newspaper librarian. While these were his main occupations, according to the 1940 census, he had also been working as a photographer, reporter prior to that time. His articles, especially those pertaining to the WPA and the new Social Security law, during the 1930s, appeared in papers from Xenia to Massillon as well as those in Sandusky, Lorain and Cleveland. During World War II, he served as a Public Information Warrant Officer, USA, Branch Immaterial, in the military. He also became a father. In 1942, Helen gave birth to a son they named Joel. I came to know him because he was a friend of my dad, W.B. Tarrant. I remember him visiting at both our home and our newspaper office way back in the 1950s. But until just lately, I never noticed that most of his visits were during the warmer months of the year. That's because the Vormelkers kept a summer home in Linwood Park. Dave's son Joel still does. Dave died in 1974. But as previously said, I've been familiar with the accompanying photograph of him for more than 60 years. I keep a copy of it on a shelf at the old newspaper office. Someday I hope to own a Graflex camera such as the one he holds in the portrait. I suppose that's only because it would make me feel more like one of those major league reporters of a yesteryear, with a good picture, a colorful narrative and, of course, a byline with a front page story. RNT